Welcome to What Would They Do, a podcast where you send in your questions and queries, which we'll answer with the original self-help gurus, pre the Instagram influencers like Louise Thompson we know too well. In this series, we'll be discussing love, to joining cults. It's up to you how to utilise our advice. In fact, anything you do, don't hold us to the repercussions.
On this week's episode of What Would They Do, we'll be discussing the theme of grief and overcoming hardship. In order to do so, we'll be focusing on Marcus Aurelius' meditations and the works of Seneca. Starting off with a question from Shelley from Yorkshire. She has asked us that I've heard people be called Stoic. What does that mean? Alfie, could you elaborate on this a bit?
So the word to be Stoic is taken directly from Stoicism, and a lot of people probably wouldn't know about the roots of that word, but Stoicism was a very popular school of philosophy in ancient Greece that was started by Zeno of Citium in around 300 BC, I think, and it was so popular because it was quite unique. It had the concept where you lived your life by the philosophy, and it sort of allowed you to overcome your problems. And to be stoic is to face something and do it and respond to it in a manner that's virtuous, or you don't let the hardship get you down. And at the centre of their philosophy was there are things that are out of your control, which you should not get hung up about because you have no control over them, and things that are in your control that you should treat with your best and live up to them. So Shelley in Yorkshire, anyone could be a Stoic, but one of the most famous ones is Marcus Aurelius. So what did Marcus Aurelius have to say, Jem?
Well, so Marcus Aurelius, in his meditations, he drew on wisdom and knowledge which he'd received from people all around him, and he frequently begins his meditations by saying "from" and then giving the name of the individual who he's drawing from. To give an example of this, in Meditations 1.4 he writes, "From my grandfather's father to dispense with attendance at public schools and to enjoy good teachers from home, and to recognise that on such things money should be eagerly spent." So this is an interesting example because we can apply it to the modern day and the theme of overcoming problems such as grief through self-education. Clearly, in this example, Marcus Aurelius, he's talking about education and spending money on education in a financial way. We can reinterpret this to see the internet as a good tool of self-improvement, and there's a lot of stuff available online. And if we mix that with the way that he's structured his meditations, saying that he draws from individuals, we can understand that with the unlimited resources available online, it's important to be aware of where you're drawing information from in your self-education.
For sure, and I think it's quite interesting and very relevant today because modern life is very complicated, and there are a lot of things that happen, and a lot of people, more and more people are atheistic. People just try and get their information from the internet, and self-help books are becoming very popular. And if you look at what these philosophers were talking about back in the day, it's very relevant. Like they wrote treatises like on anger. Seneca wrote that, and Epictetus wrote the book The Art of Being Happy. And a lot of people probably wouldn't immediately think that because it was 2,000 years ago, people would have the same sort of, outlook on things and trying to overcome the same things. But the truth is that people probably aren't much different, and
Exactly.
there's definitely a lot to be learned. And Shelley, I think being called a Stoic is quite a good thing.
Oh, of course, I completely agree. And on the subject of self-help, I think it's important to discuss the work of Ryan Holiday in the last decade or so.
Yeah. I've actually got I've got a question here from Bruce in Hartlepool. And Bruce in Hartlepool says, I follow an Instagram called The Daily Stoic. It's so popular. It's crazy. Well, thanks, Bruce.
No, and a brilliant question, very relevant to our discussion. So the Daily Stoic was originally a book written by Ryan Holiday, published in 2016, where he reinterpreted the writings of ancient Stoics, and what he did, which made it particularly successful, is he just rephrased a lot of the wording and presented it in a way that was more readable for the modern audience. And this can be a useful tool for those who are interested and who've heard about Stoicism and are interested in the concepts, and are also interested in self-help and bettering themselves as an introduction into the field.
And Ryan Holiday's done really well for himself, hasn't he? He's made an absolute empire off of this, and his Instagram's got millions of followers, and he's written all these books, and I reckon he probably thinks he's quite a smart ass, and it's quite popular in like Silicon Valley, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very popular amongst especially American entrepreneurs. He's found particular success with. And I'm just quickly going back to the point you made about the question discusses the Instagram account, this is another way that he's been quite successful in engaging with the modern audience. Is not just distributing this information through books, which are sadly on the decline in this day and age, but
he's made it. He's modernised.
Exactly. He's engaging with his audience on a modern platform.
And yeah, it's cool to bring it alive in that way. So most of the quotes, isn't it, like a statue of the philosopher with his quote? And I've seen YouTube videos where it's like top 100 Stoic quotes, and yeah, it's good to see that it's got that sort of influence online, and people are more interested in the classics.
No, exactly. He's done good work for the field. Going back to Marcus Aurelius, we've got a question from Hal from Bristol actually, who's asked, with the current climate of COVID and the sensationalism, journalism, and problems with the media, how would we go about being more aware of what the media says and the reality of the situations?
Well, I definitely think if we time travel the Stoic philosopher to this day and age, I think they'd probably have quite a lot to say about this current climate.
Indeed.
I feel like they, I think even Marcus Aurelius, he was an emperor during some plague in Rome, but with the media and the sensationalism, I think a Stoic perspective would certainly be trust in what you know, and don't become scared by what you read, for sure, because like we said earlier, it's an indifferent. You have no control over a pandemic or a plague, but you do have the choice of how you respond to it.
Exactly. And thinking back to our last point as well, with the availability of social media nowadays, news and fake news can be spread so easily. So it's important to be aware about what you're reading and the source of the information that you're reading. It links back quite nicely to a quote by Marcus Aurelius in Meditations, where he says, not to become obsessed with trivialities and not to believe the claims of miracle mongers and charlatans. So in this case, I think he was referring to religion and those who spread fake news in quote marks about religion in that time. But it can be reinterpreted to think about the role of news outlets these days and people spreading information through social media.
Yeah, he actually so that was just after Christianity had started, and I only know about this because I just wrote my dissertation on this. But Marcus Aurelius was a huge critic of Christianity, and he there's actually a quote by him where he says that the Christians sort of follow. I've actually got the quote here.
Brilliant.
What a fire soul it is that is ever prepared for its destiny. This preparedness should come from personal decision and not from mere partisanship, like the Christians. It should come rationally and nobly and in a manner likely to influence others, not just in the matter of a tragic actor. And he's actually talking about Jesus there. So Marcus Aurelius is very skeptical about the other people's information, and he was very happy to take on what he knew and what he could deduce.
Yeah, and it's a brilliant quote for just understanding the nature of Stoicism generally. In that you shouldn't be blindly following information provided to you. You should think for yourself and think critically of how to overcome situations.
I've got another question here.
Shoot away.
And it is from Lily in Merseyside.
Asking how she can incorporate Stoicism into her daily life and practices.
Okay, so that's a great question, Lily. And if you look at the Daily Stoic, they have guides you can follow actually on the Daily Stoic routine. But what I know is that they say you need to be very controlled and disciplined about what you spend your time doing. And Seneca on anger, in one of the treatises he wrote, he said that you shouldn't spend too much time doing an array of different things. You should spend your time doing one or two things that you can master and become very good at. And this also sort of ties in with the overcoming hardship thing, because Seneca was very controlled and very smart in how he did things, and he was a very powerful man in Rome, and he was actually sort of debilitated by what people think was asthma, and he overcame that, and he managed to be very disciplined with himself and achieve a lot. And also Epictetus was a slave before he became a philosopher. And these are just things that you have to overcome and really focus on you to be successful. So Lily, maybe if you wrote down some things that you wanted to focus on and really try and get good at, and just focus on those in your day, then maybe that would be some good advice.
We can see as well with the success it's had with Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. I think that largely draws from the theme of discipline. With these people, and the famous saying that time is money. When it comes to especially these massive corporations in America, their passion for Stoicism, I think, has largely come from this discipline that it instills in you.
Oh, for sure, definitely, and there's a lot of things people that they have said. Seneca said, "Live every day as a single life," and you start to view, your daily routine. You start to orientate it around these sort of things that you need to just remember, and you start to really focus and be disciplined.
Yeah, and again, going back to grief, focusing on these small tasks, such as even, for example, waking up in the morning and having a set routine that you follow, where you make sure that you have breakfast and you shower and you clean your room and your bed's made. these small things, these small acts of discipline can help also take your mind, if you're in a period of grief, they can help take your mind away from the things that are causing you the grief, and just allow you to live a bit more in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot to do with sort of meditation, I guess. So, I mean, Marcus Aurelius' book is called The Meditations. It's his reflections on what he does, and I think in the Meditations, doesn't it sort of say his daily routine? And he wakes up very early every morning. He's very disciplined, and he was the emperor of Rome, and he had obviously a lot of stuff on his plate to get done, but he had a structure to live by, and he fulfilled it, and he did really well.
I hope that was helpful, Shelley. Moving on with another good theme that Marcus Aurelius brings up in his Meditations, which is especially relevant to those dealing with grief and trying to overcome issues associated with grief, is he talks in a meditation which he draws from his brother Severus. He talks of the love of family, the love of truth, the love of justice, and the readiness to do others a kindness and eager generosity. So what I think is important about this particular meditation is he discusses the love of family, and when you're going through a period of grief, this can be useful in highlighting the importance of having a support network around you, and friends and family who you can rely on to help you, as well as helping yourself, because we talk a lot about self-help and Stoicism as being how you can improve your own life, but here we can see that Aurelius is also drawing on his family and his friends to support him in dealing with hardship.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that there are three things you should really focus on. It's your family, your friends, and your journey, where you're going, and definitely you shouldn't neglect one of those things over another one. So Seneca, in his epistles, they're all written to his father, Lucilius, I believe, Lucilius, and that's just advice he's giving his father, and it's very reflective in the way he's talking to him about his issues and other people and the way other people act. And certainly in times of grief, you shouldn't forget that you have these things around you, and you shouldn't get too wound up in your own perspective. You shouldn't be afraid to get help from other people.
And I think as hard as it is in a period of grief, he highlights as well the importance of optimism and confidence and generosity and just positive aspects of life that you can focus on, rather than putting 100% of your time and effort into feeling sad and sorry, which in itself is an important part of the process. But here Aurelius's words are important in highlighting the importance of being positive.
And Stoicism was actually a very socially orientated philosophy, and it actually gets a lot of stick. It gets characterized as sort of a boring person with no emotions that sort of just goes serenely through life unaffected by everything. But the truth is that it was very centered around a community and a communal sense of being and reciprocity between people. They have a unique figure, the Stoics, called the sage. The sage needs to be a social man of action, and that's a quote from Diogenes Laertius, because the idea of the sage was a man that has embodied all the perfect virtues of being a person, and everything he does in a correct way, and there's no doubt in his mind. And interestingly, because this all came before Christianity and things, it's quite a unique concept that people think perhaps Jesus was based upon. So it's sort of something to aspire to, being someone that.
I think as well, what's quite important is you mentioned action, and generally the idea of philosophy, especially ancient philosophy and Stoicism, is you think, and even the word meditation, you think of it as being something that's just thought about, whereas like the true importance of all of this is that you implement the thoughts and ideas that you have into actions, which then benefit your life.
You are absolutely right, Jem. And it is about embodying what you preach. Okay, so I have a quote here from Renee Brower in her book about the Stoic sage, which says, "The important point for the Stoics is that human beings should first develop reason before they can take on the next step to perfection." So what she's really saying is, yes, philosophy, like we were saying, is people get put off by, the philosopher as just a thinker, just a thinking man. Well, what the Stoics really wanted to do is teach you the ethics and the rationale for living the philosophy and embodying it. And it's about developing a disposition that you can use to face things like grief and respond in a positive way.
Yeah, and I think going back to Ryan Holiday, that's what he did so effectively, and that's what helped him become so successful. Is he found a way of allowing people in this current modern climate to engage with this ancient material, which is incredibly useful for dealing with these situations. But he managed to make it more accessible for a modern audience to then be able to understand and employ into their lives.
Yeah, certainly, and I believe Ryan Holiday actually lives on a farm, and he just he's traded the whole city life for just farm life.
That's very interesting, particularly given he was the marketing director for American Apparel, I believe. So that is that. Yeah, so he's gone from quite an I guess executive modern city lifestyle to kind of embodying the meditations and the Stoic philosophy that he writes about.
Yeah, he's absolutely embodied it, and the Stoics would look up to certain people that embodied the philosophy they preached. So they talked a lot about Socrates, who was he's the sort of founder of Western philosophy. He wasn't a Stoic, but the thing about him was he faced everything, and he was a very social person, and he was preaching a lot of this wisdom, and
he thought about things in a more abstract way than the people around him did as well.
Yeah, and people looked up to him like a lot, and eventually he was put to death, but he faced that and he accepted it. And Seneca, basically Socrates' death sort of created Seneca's whole foundation of his outlook on life, that you have to embody your beliefs and you have to face things, stoically.
And that's particularly relevant to our discussion today about grief in the current climate of coronavirus. In that it was following his death that he really understood that to move forward he had to embody these practices and really turn his thoughts into action.
Yeah,
as a way of self-improvement.
Death doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing. It's obviously it's incredibly sad. It's incredibly sad, and it definitely affects a lot of people. But one thing that the Stoics said that we haven't really got onto, because a lot of people probably wouldn't say it's very modern, but a tenet of their philosophy was to live in accordance with nature. And they said that there's no evil that nature does, because you have no control over it, and we're acting underneath nature. That's the sort of leading force in the world, and
yeah.
death, is a part of life in the end of the day.
Completely. And it's this kind of rational thinking that again really kind of underpinned the Stoic philosophy, is helping your grief through understanding that there are bigger forces and things that are out of your control. So thinking in the Stoic way can really help, especially in a modern climate where it's so easy to get caught up with everyday life and the instantness of social media and whatnot. Thinking about things on a larger scale, like a Stoic philosopher would, can be really, really useful in helping you overcome grief.
Yeah, you've got to think, is this stuff important, or is it just indifferent, social media, you don't have to get hung up on comparing yourself to other people, because, anyone would tell you there's just no point in doing that, and you'd need to have the discipline to decide what you should be doing and just embody it.
With 24 hours in the day.
Callum in London says that he's heard about Stoicism, but isn't this all just ancient history? Does anyone use Stoicism today? Well, that's a really good question, Callum. And I think Jem has actually got a little list of modern people that have used Stoicism to great effect.
Yeah, we've discussed the work of Ryan Holiday and how he's published a book that's become a bestseller in Silicon Valley. He's got an Instagram account with a great following, but this is just the work of one man, and taking on board the lessons that we learn from Stoicism. It's important to think critically and analytically about where you're drawing information from, and not just accepting knowledge or accepting what you read as the truth. So to give a few more examples of books that you can go ahead and read, there's How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, written by Donald Robertson, which he again draws on the work of Marcus Aurelius and discusses Stoicism and how Marcus Aurelius applied it to his life to deal with emotional challenges such as grief and others that we've also discussed. Then there's another book called The Practicing Stoic, a philosophical user's manual, written by Ward Farnsworth. This again is a useful book which we can see the writing of not just Marcus Aurelius but other ancient Stoics, focusing on various different themes. And a final one which I'd suggest to our listeners is A Guide to the Good Life, The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy, written by William Vine. And I think this is helpful in bringing together the ideas of Stoicism and different ancient Stoic philosophers, and just helping, and it puts it in a way that's more applicable to a modern reader. And because sometimes if you read just the ancient texts that were written by these ancient Stoics themselves, a modern audience might find it a bit difficult to engage with, just because of how they write and the words that they use and the way that they even structure their sentences can be a bit daunting to someone who's not I guess not well read in ancient literature. So reading these books that I've mentioned, it's someone else who's interpreted this and is delivering it to us in a way that a modern audience is able to better understand.
Yeah, definitely, Callum. And with COVID these days, I mean, anyone can be a Stoic. Anyone can say, lockdown is not ideal. No one's really enjoying it, but you've got to handle it, and maybe you should direct your time to pursuits that are beneficial to you.
Exactly. And time doesn't stop just because of the lockdown or because of things that change your life. So you can still use the time that you're spent indoors and unable to do things to improve your life and take on board new information and apply it to improve yourself.
Thanks, Callum, for that question.
Brilliant question.
I think that's a pretty good time to round off our little half now.
If you've got any other any other questions, just shoot away on our Twitter account or leave a comment under this YouTube video. And feel free to shoot any questions you have.